We will continue from where the last video was cut. Unfortunately, up to 15 minutes yung ating video recording, and so we had to cut into several parts yung ating lecture. So again, let me go back to aberratio ictus. This is mistaken blow, where the actual victim was not the intended victim. No? So the offender is intending to do an injury to one person but actually inflicts it to another. No? Halimbawa, in this particular case, this is the intended victim but nakaiwas siya, umalis dun sa pool, and so the injury was caused to another person, no, na halimbawa nasa pool, no, the actual victim. That is aberratio ictus. Now, another circumstance is what we call as praeter intentionem. There is one subject. The intended victim is actually the actual victim, but the offense or the result, the injury caused to the victim is greater than what was intended, right? Mas malala, right? Praeter intentionem. But take note that, if say person A act or constitutes an act sufficient means to carry out a graver felony, then he cannot claim that as a defense praeter intentionem. Kasi right from the start, gusto na niyang gawin yung crime na mas grave yung penalty or mas matindi kaysa sa dun sa nangyari. No? So, iba yun. It's the opposite. Okay? So, importante ang tatlong circumstances na yan in understanding and also appreciating how wrongful acts be different from that what was intended by the offender. Now, remember that this is just a quick recall or refresher when we try to understand omissions or the concept of omissions being punished by the revised penal code. Just to give you an idea, although we will meet this in the discussion during criminal law too, but omissions such as misprision of treason, disloyalty of a public officer, negligence and tolerance in prosecution of offenses, yung conniving with or consenting to evasion, pagka yung sa mga, evasion of a service of sentence, right? Abandonment of a person in danger or abandonment of one's own victim, abandoning a minor, mga omission yun, hindi mo ginawa. Okay? So, those are still punishable by the revised penal code. But please do recall as well the concept of mistake of fact. We have discussed this previously in our lecture. Okay, remember the Achong case. Now, this time, we want to understand also what are these, certain doctrines that concerns culpable crimes, culpa, no? Yung by fault. Okay. There is what you call as a doctrine of last clear chance before we go to the discussion on impossible crimes. Okay. What is this doctrine of last clear chance? This is, the contributory negligence of the party injured will not defeat the action if it be shown that the accused might, by the exercise of reasonable care and prudence, have avoided the consequence or consequences of the negligence of the injured party. So this is actually a defense by the defendant in a damage suit against liability by transferring it to the plaintiff. Okay? Last clear chance. Dapat, kumbaga, sino ba yung transfer the burden, no? The burden of proof, no? Sino ba yung dapat meron sanang, kumbaga, makakaiwas? Kanino ba yung burden na pinaka-burden? Kung sino yung pinaka merong control over the circumstances para umiwas. Okay, last clear chance. So the doctrine is not applicable in criminal cases because the liability is penal in nature. But the liability cannot be transferred to the other party. But this is applicable in civil cases. Okay? It is not the case between two parties involved in an incident, but rather between an individual and the state. Okay? But this is for understanding better yung culpable felonies. Now, we go to impossible crimes. This is interesting, okay, because this has been asked in bar exams. Okay. Impossible crime is technically not a crime, but with a penalty. Okay. The person is punished for his criminal tendencies. Okay. So it's the tendency that is being punishable because technically the crime would not have been committed because elements were not met. Okay. So you may want to ask, what is the purpose in punishing an impossible crime when there's no crime really that has been committed? So this is purposely to suppress criminal propensity, yung propensity or criminal tendencies. The offender has not committed a felony, but subjectively he is a criminal. What are the requisites? That the act performed would have been an offense against persons or property, that the act was done with evil intent, of course, and that its accomplishment is, ito yung mga defining keywords, that the accomplishment of the act is inherently impossible or that the means employed is either inadequate or ineffectual. Okay, dalawang bagay yon. What do you mean by inadequate? Okay. Insufficient. Insufficient. Halimbawa ay if you want to do poisoning, maliit na amount, instead of putting in the right amount of poison to cause the death of the victim, kulang yung amount. So that's inadequate, insufficient. Okay. What about ineffectual? Means employed did not produce the result. Okay. An example would be yung halimbawa babarilin mo yung victim to kill him or her, but as you pull the trigger wala palang ammunition, no? Or it's empty, the gun is empty, so that's ineffectual. Okay? Because whether you like it or not, talagang walang mangyaring death because the gun is actually empty. All right. What about inherently impossible? Okay. This one will have to categorize because it can either be legally impossible or it can also be physically impossible. Right? Let's try to understand further. When you speak of legal impossibility, the intended acts, even if completed, must not amount to a crime. Okay? It would apply to those circumstances where the motive, the desire, and the expectation is to perform an act in violation of a law or the revised penal code or special penal laws, that there is intention to perform, a physical act, that there is performance of the intended act, and yet the consequence resulting from the intended act does not amount to a crime. Legally impossible kasi hindi na-meet yung elements of the crime punishing such act. Okay. What about physical impossibility? This one refers to extraneous circumstances unknown to the actor or beyond his control to prevent the consummation of the intended crime. Okay. Ano ba yan? Bigyan natin ng magandang example, no? The case of Intud versus the Court of Appeals actually modified the concept of impossible crime. In this particular case, there are 4 culprits, all armed with firearms and with intent to kill. So they went to the intended victim's house and after having pinpointed the bedroom of the victim, all the 4 culprits fired and riddled the said room with bullets, thinking that the intended victim was there in the room, and as it was about 10 p.m. in the evening. So they're expecting natutulog or nagpapahinga dun sa kanyang kwarto yung intended victim. Consequently, or not consequently, fortunately, or fortunately, unfortunately, because it depends on the perspective. It's fortunate for the victim that he was not there. It so happened that the intended victim did not come home that evening, and so she was not actually in her room, right? Unfortunate for the culprits because they thought that the victim was there inside the room. That's why they riddled the room with gunfire. So technically, there was no victim who died, right? But eventually and consequently, the culprits will still prosecuted and convicted by the trial court for attempted murder. Again, they are punished for their criminal tendency or propensity. So, kailangan nating intindihin yun. And quick refresher also. Last time, we did discuss what are the stages of execution, no? Yung consummated, yung prostrated, and also yung attempted. Just remember all the elements to qualify whether the act is or the crime is in its attempted stage or consummated or prostrated. No? But you'll have to understand that there are crimes na walang attempted stage. Okay? Or there are crimes that can only be punishable when they are consummated and not in its prostrated or attempted stage. Okay? Remember that acts would also have 2 categories, internal acts and external acts. When you speak of internal acts, these are merely ideas, plans. Okay? These are generally not punishable, although there are specific crimes punished under the revised penal code, even if they are mere ideas. Okay, but when you speak of external acts, this refers to preparatory acts and also the acts of execution. Okay, kailangan yung maintindihan yun, no? So remember also that although napag-usapan na rin natin to last time, no? There are formal crimes. These are usually punished under